I'm
Get
gonna
going.
call the meeting to order at, it's 7 o'clock, go figure. So we will call the meeting to order. Thank you, everybody, for coming once again. We have a super quorum because our alternate is here too. So this is,
When this situation like that, would alternate leave?
I would discourage it, but
It could at any time become important for
But you
you
can
to
play-
be a full voting member
you
here.
can feel free to play with the dog,
Yeah.
you know,
No, I'm good.
until called upon.
I just looked at protocol.
Actually, in the absence of one of our full-time members, you are officially a full-time member in residence. In fact, here you are.
Cool.
Thank you.
That's your new title,
Absolutely,
full-time
absolutely.
member in residence.
I mean, any time
FTIR.
somebody else could, I mean, technically, we're supposed to be, well, yeah, no, I get, okay, never mind. Never mind.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I have no idea how extensive the conversations will be tonight around certain things because I just have no idea. But we're going to start with the,
You do have control, though.
yes,
As the
I
chair,
do.
you know.
And, if necessary,
Exactly.
get the hook. We're gonna start with Mark Vincent with the DPW budget, and if you could, the videographer asked if you could sort of slide over here.
Sure.
So I guess as to be seen on camera, is that correct?
Yes,
To the mic, to the camera,
but,
so,
This will be my.
so this way everybody will know who we're talking to.
Congratulations.
I looked at that, I didn't totally want it on video.
Okay. When you're ready.
well, Mark, I just wanna say, hi Helen. I just wanna say a couple of things that we waited until the end of the last presentation to say, just so that everybody understands. It has been the practice of the FinCom since last year anyway, to not do our recommendations kind of in line, but wait until we've had a chance to hear
Sure.
all the department heads
Yeah.
and whatever. So that won't be until next month.
Uh-huh.
So don't read anything into that.
Okay.
It's not, it doesn't mean anything except that we wait.
Okay.
That's it. That's pretty much the whole deal right there.
Okay. All righty, well, I have 6 budgets, I guess that we can sort of review together. Starting with 417 facilities. Incidentally, out of these 6 budgets, I have made every attempt and accomplished to level fund 5 out of the 6. So we'll get to the somewhat not so good news towards the end. Facilities, that's the budget that's used for our town buildings, and it also pays utilities, pays a lot of HVAC repairs, et cetera, plumbing repairs, that sort of thing on 6 of the year-round town buildings, and as many as 6 seasonal buildings, including beach restrooms, et cetera, and the ponds also. I level funded that. Some of these line items were sort of mixed and matched. In other words, some of these line items were increased a little bit, and other ones decreased a little bit. In other words, what's a fortunate thing about this budget is over the past couple of years, we took advantage of $200,000 of grants from the Green Communities Act and switched many of our buildings over from fuel oil to propane, which is much more efficient. Well, obviously, we don't have natural gas out this way. So we're able to accomplish that to the point where the only building that's left on fuel oil is the library now, but that is a fairly new system. So that's why you'll see maybe increases in propane and reductions in fuel oil. So that we were able to accomplish level funding that budget at $340,950. You will see in FY19, there was an excess expenditure under contract services. That's because we had to replace 2 boilers in the fire department. So there was an
Really?
unexpected cost there, yep.
What happened there,
Brand new.
if I may ask?
Relatively new, and they were aluminum cast boilers.
Yeah.
And they were not,
Cracked?
corroded. Yeah,
And no warranty?
no warranty. the warranty had expired. And we
Like
thought
the
that
year
too.
before,
Yeah, something like, yeah, 14
as,
months or
as is
something
their
like that,
watch,
yeah.
yeah.
So that was unfortunate, that money was
What did you replace them with?
cast iron.
Has a
So
better
so as to
record.
prevent that
Yeah.
from happening again as much as we
Well,
possibly
do you
can.
know what it was that corroded them? Was it salt?
It was just the nature of that boiler. Turns out it probably wasn't a good decision in the first place to use that type of boiler, although it was the cutting edge technology at the time.
Sometimes there's
So-
nothing like tried and true.
Yeah, I know. So
Can I ask a
unfortunately,
question?
Pardon?
What'd they put in the police department?
Yeah.
it would- not aluminum boilers.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure, 'cause if there's
Yeah.
any sort of warranty.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's why you see that expenditure there. So
All right.
Electricity,
yes.
are we gonna get free stuff this year
Uh,
from the solar?
Is
yeah,
that
we-
online yet?
We have, no, it is not, and we haven't I haven't anticipated that in this budget.
That's fine. It's better to get it and not anticipate it than the other way around.
But is that gonna come in like,
We don't know how we're gonna reflect out yet, so I don't know, it's just a tough thing to budget for at this point.
So, another question, and I think
it did go up, is there a reason why it went up so much?
Well, we, the building, the new police department is all electricity now, all electric. So, some of that is from that, but what's anticipated is that extra electrical use over that building, so.
So hopefully they'll
And, you
get
know,
an
our rates
offset
do
there.
change, we do go through Cape Lake Compact agreement, and those rates can also, can go up, even though it's a relatively low rate, it can go up as well.
But don't you anticipate getting the array online this year?
Yes.
No timing on that yet, or?
No, not as far as I know.
How is that gonna come in? Do we know how that's gonna come in now? Do we know where that's gonna be reflected as far as is it going to be parsed out
You know,
to each building?
to
or
be
is it
honest
gonna-
with you, the Energy Committee has been working hand in hand with them on that. And so I'm not totally sure when that whole
What
thing's
the
gonna
offset is
transfer,
gonna
yeah.
be and how that's gonna
Right.
be portioned out over
Mhm.
the percentages of the departments. I would be curious to find out how that income offsets the budgets going forward. But
Mm-hmm.
I agree, I'd rather be more cautious in not anticipating.
I don't even have a
until we see
percentage to
what it
go by, too.
Because electricity is one of those things you can really budget for. You know?
No, especially when you're
It's like
using
you see
it,
what happened here in 2018.
is. Yeah.
How would you see that coming down the road?
and especially when we're gonna be using at least a portion of it for heat, so you don't know.
Has there been any initiative to
Exactly.
put in
Yes.
smart thermostats or smart sensors or whatever in order to moderate the use based on temperature, time of year, whatever?
We are, there's been too much of a, too much of an effort. It sounds a little sarcastic, but we've gotten over computerized in some of our controls in our building, where it seems to have backfired on us, at least in one building that I know of right now. So, controls can be too much of a good thing.
You can get a relatively simple programmable thermostat.
Yeah, when I'm talking,
You're talking,
like the fire department, the controls in there are just overwhelming.
Yeah.
Something would be simpler, or, with just what you're saying.
Yeah.
But sometimes things get over-designed.
yes, they do.
Another question, and it's not in your budget now, but there are a couple of buildings in town that may have to have sprinkler systems put in. Would that fall in any way under your department if it
You need
happened?
for fire protection?
Yeah, the elementary
that-
school, library, it's been talked about.
It wouldn't fall under my budget for the elementary school, that's for sure.
Schools, yeah.
But the fire chief would alarm me to either budget for or he will budget for.
So any kind of staffing, operational consistent,
That would
You would
fall
be-
under,
you-
yeah,
yeah,
after
you'd
it's in
integrate it
place,
into it.
yeah, right.
right, okay.
We don't anticipate that happening in this fiscal year, but
So, you know, and
coming down.
I don't need,
Right.
certainly don't need to tell the finance committee that we're budgeting now for what could transpire a year and a half from now too, in a lot of
Yes.
this, so it's still going.
As you should.
So,
Are you keeping up with the system, the software that gives you all where you've entered all of the building systems and their
yes,
lifespans and things?
we're
Right.
trying the best we can. We're still not happy with the software system that we have, but we're working on it.
Problem with software is it's designed by somebody who wasn't you.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
It made sense
You
to
know, there's a
them.
lot of stuff out there, but they try to oversell some things sometimes, and
Yeah.
sometimes simpler is better, but,
No,
so.
probably would have done it on a spreadsheet.
Um,
That's me.
Some of the things we do on a regular spreadsheet, but other things, the software comes in handy.
Well, so you make the most of it.
If there's no more questions on that, we can go to 420, DPW operations. This is the budget that's used to mainly take care of repairs on equipment related to the transfer station, DPW, and fire department vehicles. We do not maintain police department vehicles. Again, level funded at 149,550. There are mainly 4 line items within this budget, B1, B2, B4, and B11, that are all related to the maintenance of those vehicles. And sometimes, depending on what the event is, whether it is an outside repair or parts, those line items can either go up or down individually. So,
So all of the really big numbers. in the
yeah, I mean,
Bs
it's
are
almost
vehicle
like,
maintenance.
I would hope, sometimes I wish that these 4 line items were all one line item budget, because they're really all related to repairs. But, with the exception maybe of the fire vehicles, because we try to break out the cost of those repairs. So I've tuned those every time there's a budget, because sometimes they can go down, sometimes they can go up. And I total up all 4 of those budgets and budget appropriately for each line item, and then try it again for the following year and see where it comes out. But
Yeah.
usually they're adjusted every year. But the budget itself,
What are the
been
main
level.
factors that drive up or down? So we're looking at the actual for 2019 on maintenance of the fire vehicles. It went up about double what was budgeted, but then if you look at the B11, it went down by almost the same amount of money.
so
What would drive those numbers one way or the other?
So we're finding that the fire department vehicles, it was decided 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, that to track the fire department vehicles individually. They weren't tracked individually, and then we finally put in a line on just for fire vehicles. So, you're right, that is almost double what was budgeted. Some of that has to do with the timing, with their inspections. They may have been 2 services within 1 fiscal year instead of spread out over 2 fiscal years. And we're talking, their repairs can be much as $5,000 or $6,000 on any one of those fire vehicles. Very, very, very expensive to repair. So, you know, that $8,000, if I look back through the budget, I can almost guarantee you that one of those budgets was probably at least $8,000. So it doesn't take much to move that budget. So I level funded the budget line item I've been talking with the fire chief over this to try to see how we can spread some of those repairs out, and then when there is an exception for emergency repair, deal with that separately. And if we have to increase it, not this year, but maybe next year, that may have to happen, depending. But, like again, that's the old crystal ball effect too.
We talk about A1 a little bit.
A1?
Yeah, there's a jump from
Yeah,
9.
That's union
That's-
contract.
Contract.
Can't do anything about that.
Contracts.
That's not additional personnel, it's just contract.
Well, it's 2 factors in there. It's contractors, and we haven't had a full staff. We haven't had a full accompaniment at the DPW for about 7 years now.
Why is that?
We haven't been unable to get help, and we've lost personnel at the same time. Most recently, meaning about 7 or 8 weeks ago, we finally have a full accompaniment. Accompaniment, is that the right word?
Compliment,
Sounds like it's an orchestra.
compliment.
You're fully,
Compliment.
do you mean you're fully staffed?
Fully staffed, that too.
Never use Latinate words.
Yeah.
So, you are fully staffed,
Right now, we are fully staffed,
and when did your most recent member come on board?
about 7 weeks ago.
Oh,
So,
okay,
yeah.
yeah, all right.
So,
Is
what's
that
reflected
part of
there
what's
next?
reflected in the upcoming budget? The new,
Yes.
the new staff?
Yes. So that 819 that you see there was not a full staff.
How'd you get it done with that amount of money? When it's $150,000 more, that's 2 positions?
Well, some of it was union contracts. Some of that increase, you mean,
Mm-hmm.
is union contract increases and anticipation of having a full staff. So 50 of that could have been union contract increases, and the other 50 could be the extra personnel in that.
What was the union contract average percentage that it went up?
3%.
3?
So that 819 is a very tough figure to be driven by because of where the contract was at the time and what we had for personnel.
Yeah,
So that doesn't
Because that
include
additional-
hiring outside people to get the job done? Like plowing?
That's only included in the snow removal budget.
Oh, that's not in this?
No.
Okay.
So can we expect with that additional increase to the full-time 2021 budget that the overtime, actually, overtime 19 budget, it's 34.4, stays the same as level funded? You didn't use all of it and you
Mhm.
used about 10,000 less. Can we anticipate that overtime budget being decreased because the full-time, because of the full complement of staff members and the increase in the full-time staff?
No, because generally that overtime use is after hours during emergencies. So no matter, it isn't like,
Okay, I just didn't know if the overtime was being used to compensate for the lack of staff in the full-time budget. Okay,
and I think there again, that overtime number can fluctuate due to emergencies that we have at the time,
and that's gonna be things like water main breaks or,
and not water main breaks, but we have a lot of, if we have any storms, hurricanes, trees down,
yeah, we're
those
not gonna
types
have
of.
any of those.
Okay, yeah. Well, then I guess we can change it right
Which is
now.
Yeah, just leave them alone,
Just
you know?
so, okay, so
If a
things
tree
that
falls
have
in
come up-
Wolfett, does anybody actually
Has-
know?
So, okay, I just wanted to understand the nature of the
Yeah.
emergency.
I don't wanna beat the dead horse here, but between 2020 and 2021, what's the staff count in 2020 versus 2021?
What's the staff
Or,
count?
or 2019, the actual, do you have a sense of just how many people we're talking about?
Well, part of that year was 13, part of the year was 14.
Okay.
We were down at 3 people at one point because,
And I'd just like to point out, these are all approved positions. They're
Yeah,
just
it's not,
positions that are not being,
these
They're
are
not
not, it's
brand
not
new positions.
brand new ads.
Oh, no,
We understand
this is
that.
just an FYI thing,
We understand that.
just curious.
yeah.
yeah.
Alright,
Okay, no more questions on that. I got highways at 422. This is the budget that's used for department, usually stormwater projects that we do in-house. Some localized road projects from coal patching, Minor road repairs and major road repairs, we usually utilize Chapter 90 funding. Within this budget, there is a $50,000 Chapter 90 supplement that we decided to put in about 2 or 4 years ago as some sort of effort to supplement Chapter 90 funding. Level funded.
Okay.
Good there.
Snow removal, I know that we have to level fund.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is,
For the benefit of anybody who has not heard that explanation before, could you just,
so the snow removal budget is the only budget that we can legally deficit spend by Mass General Law. That is, if we get into a heavy winter, we can automatically overspend that. But we do not like to,
there is some requirement about level funding though, right? We can't
What'd you say?
cut the budget there in
can't
anticipation of a
budget.
good
that's right,
year.
exactly. You can't cut the budget in anticipating of a mild winter.
Right,
You know, once you
we'll get
reach
banged
a-
by the state by then.
Right, exactly.
So,
But what I do with this budget,
It's an
say every
explanation.
5 years, I'll look at 5-year averages and then try to take out the high, take out the low, and then average the remaining 3, and then spread that cost over the applicable line items to come up at least with some sort of realistic average over 5 years.
So is there any snowstorm that DPW can handle it without outside contract services?
Sometimes during the day, depending on the type of storm, we can just take care of town main roads and hills, although we don't like to exclude anyone because the town made the decision to sand and plow 134 private roads as well as 88 town roads. So we have to be very careful about our decision-making because we don't want to go out and prioritize any particular road and discount or exclude a private road where it's jeopardizing somebody on that road. Obviously, we're going to prioritize,
town.
well, yes, town roads, but town main roads. You know, Main Street is going to get more attention than, say, someone that private road. So it can be tricky at times.
Mr. McGee,
Yes.
the select board policy very clearly gives the DPW discretion, total discretion to make any decision you need to make. So it's up to you, and if you had some good reason not to plow any private roads first, you would totally be able to do that legally.
Congratulations.
That's why we're,
Read the policy.
it's, so it's not easy to, every storm is different, every situation seems to be different, and we're very careful about our decisions.
I understand, I live on a plowed private road and
Okay, so,
we stand outside with our Bic lighters waiting for the DPW truck
Wow.
during some
okay.
storms.
All right. So
Okay,
let me ask you a question about the streetlights.
okay.
The fiscal 19 actual was less than half of the budget.
Right.
What,
So, you may remember, has it been 2 years ago that we switched over all 234 streetlights
that was long.
to LED, which essentially cut the budget in half.
Yes.
What this new budget also provides for is repairs of lights. So besides the use, we also have to anticipate repair for certain lights. Hopefully, we don't have to expend that extra amount, but we have to budget for it.
Reasonable. All right.
Okay, so that's, now we get to
Now we get to the bad news.
transfer station. More recently, and I don't know if you got the updated, but does contract services on your budget reflect $220,000.
It does.
On B2, okay, so you have the most recent version. That was 191. We have a contract, we meaning the town has a contract for disposal of our trash with a company called New Bedford Waste. We used to be with CMAS. When it came time for a new contract, the best that CMAS could offer us at that time was $75 a ton. And we were a contract with New Bedford Waste at $53 a ton. It was a no-brainer at the time. What has happened in the meantime, as well, and has for a lot of other towns, or most other towns on the Cape, is the cost of disposal has gone up. And it has to do with fuel costs, it has to do with landfill closures, because even the incinerators have backup landfills that they have to use in emergencies. When they're overtaxed, there's backup landfills all around the state. The state is closing those. Consequently, a lot of the refuse has to be trucked,
Out of state.
even to as far as New Hampshire. Some, believe it or not, is going to Virginia.
Oh, good.
So, in the case of our contract with New Bedford Waste, they've had to increase their contract by $23 per ton. And there isn't much of a better deal in town.
Right,
that
but
we
it's
can have.
contract, how did they get away with that?
Well, the contract, Dan and I are looking into the contract right now, and it may or may not be something that is viable under their contract. However, the thing is that there isn't a better deal around.
So it brings
So
it
even if
basically up
we
to
release
cost
them
of
out of the
CMAS,
contract, our only other outlet is CMAS,
which is about the same price.
and actually more. So that's where we are as far, at least right now, in a budgeting.
Okay.
So the good news is,
A couple other things have decreased.
yeah, I mean, the cost of recycling is still up there, but at least it's sort of leveled off a little bit. It's a big unknown. But I can remember when I started here almost 22 years ago that we were taking between 3,500 and 4,000 tons of trash to CMAS. Last year we took 850 tons.
Wow.
So at least we're not multiplying this inflated figure by 4,000. It's
Say
only-
that one more time. You took 20 years
About
ago.
20 years ago, we were hauling about between 3,500 and 4,000 tons of trash to an incinerator at CMAS. Now we are hauling 800.
800.
And that's due to a lot of factors. It's due to recycling, it's due to pay-as-you-throw, and some of it is due to the factor that a lot of the contractors have decided to go elsewhere. But
Go
at
elsewhere to
least,
dispose of their trash.
yes.
So 3,500 down to 800.
Yep,
That's great.
yep.
Part of that is because when pay-per-throw came in, a lot of people decided to go with private contractors to
Yeah.
remove their trash, so they don't have to, heaven forbid, sort and recycle.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is fine, because that goes somewhere else and we're not
Yeah.
paying
I
for
mean,
it.
that's actually, this is like a big actual question of mine. So that's great, right? That's
Yes.
like
We're
kind
actually,
of a windfall for us.
yeah, and in terms of tonnage, we're actually recycling more in tonnage than we are disposing.
And we're not seeing the impacts of the fact that recycling, do we actually have, people that take the recycling and use it, or is that sort of, that's not our concern, we don't worry about?
Take the recyclable.
As in, is it actually being recycled or is it? winding
Yes,
up
it
in a-
is.
Yeah.
We didn't go to single stream recycling, of which was a tough call because a lot of people wanted to go to that way. But since the China sword came in, China is more picky about the recyclables that they take.
Right, that's why I
We
asked.
stayed with dual and even 3 streams, so the quality of recyclables has maintained up where people want our recycling as opposed
It's
to.
really good news.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So
the decision not to go to single stream is
let me
very
put my ignorance on
Very
display
good
here,
move.
okay? The 53 now, 70-some dollars a ton that we're spending is for the waste that is not being recycled? Or is that for everything that gets hauled out of here?
It's for the increases related to the solid waste that gets hauled away,
Okay,
okay? What's in
Imagine
that,
what it would be if we
what's
were
in
still-
that B2 line under contract services includes solid waste, it includes the tipping fee for demolition. We have our demolition hauled away at $130 a ton, and it also includes their disposal costs for recycling.
okay.
That's all in that total there.
Imagine what it would be if we were hauling
So
5,000.
recycling is not a break-even thing, it costs
Well,
us.
it costs us, yeah. And it cost us more than that, $93 right now. Depending on the material, some can cost us a little, some can cost around $70 a ton. Some of these things can cost around $130 a ton, depending on the market.
But most of it is
Markets are-
lighter than regular trash.
Markets are going, we used to get money back, and we're
Right.
not getting money back for the materials anymore, you know.
Not to beat a dead horse, but cardboard, you don't have someone that would give you money for pure cardboard?
Not right now.
Really?
Check with me next week.
That was always a moneymaker.
Mm-hmm, yep.
Yeah,
It's,
things
you
have
know, I was
changed.
in the paper business and that was big money.
Yep, I'm not saying they won't come back, but it can fluctuate. About 3 months ago we did, we were getting $5 a ton. Before that, we were getting 15, before that, we were getting 40. But that's not to say that, you know, hopefully these things will get more competitive, but there's a glut of these materials right now. But cardboard is the best one out there.
Right.
Newspaper and cardboard.
Well, I mean, a lot of cardboard goes in and it goes into the general paper. And then you have around the back pure cardboard for commercial people.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think you can trust some people to,
No,
well, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to him.
I don't know, but I recycle my own cardboard every week also along commercially. And I know.
I'm a good recycler.
No, I know.
I think that there's a lot of people, because Amazon is a big contributor to
Cardboard.
Mhm.
cardboard.
Yeah.
Policing it, or, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm being too,
There just isn't anybody to take it. I know Mark spends a lot of time on
There's
this.
so much out there.
And there's more- so
All
much more,
towns
yeah.
are doing
It's
it.
commodity.
so it's
And also,
like
like, they
supply
try
and
to
demand.
police it. That was my point. They do their best to police it. It's a nightmare to police
And
it.
people can put it in the purple bag, and that's like, you can't police that.
yeah, I'm just trying to, like, if he kept it pure and he could promise to be pure, then he could maybe negotiate a better
That's a
deal, is my
that's a
point.
high bar, though.
That's
I
an
don't know,
awful lot to
the
ask.
dump does a great
They
job.
do.
They do, but it's hard to maintain a perfect record, and these, like, one pizza box gets in there, all kinds of trouble.
So,
Maybe we're spending too
That's-
little
yeah.
on the recycling committee, 775.
so I understand what you're saying,
Hmm.
you know, and
I'd be happy to,
it's the
it's,
finding.
You wanna stand out there and be the
No,
cardboard
no, but
guy?
I can go around to where the
Write
commercial
tickets.
guys do, and I'll give them all pure cardboard stuff.
I got flashbacks of the cans with the Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
Oh. I don't know.
You know, we spend a lot of our time just finding where we can get rid of it.
No, I know,
Who's gonna
I know,
take
it's,
it,
it's daunting,
You know,
it's in the news all the time.
My nightmares were left up there with containers full of stuff and nowhere to take it.
Yeah,
And you're coming in with your stuff, and all we're worried about, can we find a market?
right,
Where, you know, we have to find a destination for this stuff.
Yeah.
right. No, I
So,
know, every
I
time.
understand completely what you're saying, you're right to a degree, and let's hope these markets will come back.
Mm.
But
Why did
I
they
always
go
kinda
away
knew
so
that it was gonna
long?
end up being a
Too
commodity.
much stuff out there.
You know.
More
So there's so much
towns
being
are doing
recycled,
it.
that's what's driving the market down, you think? On the
It's the
cardboard?
quality,
commodity.
it's the
Yeah.
quality and the markets that will take it.
How do
It's
they
both.
judge the quality? Is it a percentage? Like, for instance, those, when you recycle paper, I know that people don't get all paper in there. If you look in there, there's a little plastic. So does it go
Yeah.
by percentage? For
So-
instance, if you give them 80% pure or 90%, or is it judged by percentage?
Yes, it's judged by percentage because they have to weed through this stuff, and the less contaminants they have to take out,
So you
More
actually get a
plan.
report on your
Our
period.
report is that they're taking it and they'll wanna take it again.
Oh, so they can make a
You see what I'm saying?
decision
So
if
they
it's
can
not
make,
pure.
so, no, that's coming from Wellfleet, we know what
Okay.
theirs, what the quality of theirs, they'll take it.
Right.
Because if it isn't as good a couple times in a row, they're gonna say, you know what, better find somebody else.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
All
So
right, well, good job.
unfortunately, that's the,
It's rough out there.
Yes.
Anybody have any other questions about the budgets themselves?
I think that's, you've covered what we needed to know.
So, one other thing that we've been asking in general is if you projected forward 2 to 3 years, are there any big surprises coming that you can foresee now? You don't have to be right, you don't have to be precise, but just something where you say, oh my God, you know, and we went through the capital plan, so we have some notion of what equipment's coming.
right,
But if, you know, and I guess you said you're fully staffed now, so there,
well.
that would be another big area.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that, you know, the demands on the department are going up because we have more buildings now than we ever had before. So, you know, just keep that in mind, as far as giving everything the attention that it deserves. So, other than that, I mean, if you look through the capital plan, there's a couple big projects coming up. You know, we're looking at Keller's Corner there, possible revetment there to try to save that.
That's a really good example, because one of the things we were wondering when we saw that on the budget, and it got pushed back, I guess because you're doing a study on it,
Doing a
right?
study, yeah.
But as part of that study, I think it's a generic question, and it'll be interesting to also talk to the water and wastewater people in that context. That's why they're all sort of clustered together in a way, is we live in a seaside community. Depending on what you think, the water is rising more or less quickly and will continue to over the next 50 years or whatever. And there are open questions about how you serve the shore, and the harbor, of course, but also how you serve homes that are near the shore, how you serve revetments that are near the shore. Is it a stopgap when you're doing it, or is it something that's intended to last 10, 20, 30 years? Is it, you fix this one like whack-a-mole, but another one pops up next year, and another one, suddenly you're looking at $200,000-$300,000 every year to fix something?
Yeah,
So, I mean, I guess when you look forward, I just love your gut feeling on,
Well,
that
it
question.
isn't just me, I mean, with help from the Cape Cod Commission and their reports that look at the vulnerable areas, we take their reporting and, you know, through grants that are going to be available, CZM grants, and through town budgeting, we'll address each and individual area. That could be one, you know, the Duck Creek Causeway going across to the pier, that's another vulnerable area. Briar Lane Culvert, right down by the box lunch, you know, who knows what's gonna happen with that when, if this Herring River project ever takes place, because that is all part of the Herring River, we have to keep that in mind too, how it's gonna affect all those areas. So there's the Herring River project, there's sea level rise, and we just try to keep ahead of the curve by anticipating any of these vulnerable areas through budgeting and grants. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what we're trying to do.
so who do you interact with, or do you interact with anyone on a regular basis to kind of review the area and say, look, this looks like a problem area in 2-3 years, maybe we want to start studying that? Or is it more of a reactive thing that when there is a problem,
Well, like I
a
said,
committee is put together to kind
We
of
have
go
a
over it?
report, that was done through Cape Cod Commission and addressed all those vulnerable areas. So then we have to prioritize those areas and then budget for some engineering, just the same way we're trying to do here at Keller's Corner, all along that area, and get a report on where we need to go from here, if at all.
If you go for funding from outside the town, whether it's a state grant or whatever,
USDA, sure.
USDA, is there a lag in that? If you say, okay, I'm gonna go after funding for a project I think might be 2 years out, but it takes 4 years to get the USDA to say yes or put you on their list or whatever, or is there some way to kind of coordinate, you know, or anticipate
Usually we'll
that you can
find,
get funding?
usually we'll find out where and when funding is available. In other words, if we find out the USDA is gonna come out with funding in a year and a half or 2 years, they'll send notification to town, this money's gonna be available. Hillary's involved in this too, where if we think that we have a home for that funding, we'll start applying now. And there's coastal zone management funding. There's a few resources out there.
When you dump sand from under the pier on Keller's Corner, how long does that last?
Not long. This year it didn't last, I don't think, but a month.
Anyway,
Because we had those storms and those high tides.
yeah.
So we're really, what's the term? Fighting the water and wind.
Right. Well, that cement bulkhead next to it is probably exasperating it.
All those groins are full too from doing that time after time, so it ends up back down at the Yellow Pier and it fills in those groins. So part of this project would be excavating out those groins again
Really?
so that they could do what their job is
They just
and
be
to put a
doing it.
revetment in, yeah. They
They'd be
would
doing it more, taking it from underneath the pier, that's gonna end up there faster, wouldn't you think?
If,
If you take the groins out?
no, not take them out, clean them out.
Clean.
They're all
Oh.
filled out in between the groins.
Right. Okay.
Where they would protect the elk pier. So the thing is to clean out those groins so they can do what they, stop that energy and then put up a revetment to try to help.
So they're
The
looking.
problem is that, further west, you have all those concrete walls that were built over time and those groins and all that energy is moving itself down towards Keller's Corner and then down towards the elk.
So they're looking at a mitigation for that particular spot.
No, I think we're going down as far as, until we get into some private property. The town property goes from where that concrete wall ends up to where that first house is. We at least want to try to
You know what,
remediate
the
that.
Donald's house where the Pickards did that,
Yeah,
and there's 2x4s zigzag double, so they're a couple
Yeah.
feet apart.
mhm.
It's unbelievable. The sand goes in there, gets stuck in there, the rack line skips over there, and it's like a unbelievable
So they've got their own
soft
concrete.
solution.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
And it collects the sand, it doesn't seem to be able to get back out.
mhm.
So
So,
you might look at that as
Yeah.
far as
yeah.
if you got a grant to do that
Yeah.
right where those, if the problem is.
mhm. Yeah.
I've never seen, I mean, I'm there every day, and
Mhm.
it's really
Yeah,
a good
pretty impressive,
solution.
yeah.
It's
So-
very impressive.
I know I've asked this before and I feel like an idiot, but where's Keller's Corner? That particular
Yeah.
designation is completely unfamiliar to me.
Where Kendrick takes the turn around the little cottages there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where the
I-
old wealthy.
Is somebody here is smart enough to know why it's
Motel,
called
where
Keller's
that resort
Corner?
Bruce Keller was,
Okay.
he inherited from his father, I don't know what his name was.
My local memory doesn't go back that far. I've only lived here 20 years.
Well, thank you.
Oh,
Fred,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fred, I have an answer to the question about the array. It's supposed to come into commercial operation in the first quarter of 2020, and what we're waiting for, it's all set to go, to work.
Waiting for the
But
title.
there's an Eversource interconnect that needs to happen down at Colson Road. What?
I'm sorry, I missed, what were we speaking
Yeah,
of?
array,
it's-
the
the
solar
array.
array.
Oh,
The
solar,
array,
yeah.
your new source of
This-
infinite power.
This went through the select board and it's sort of sitting in court. It needs a land court title clearance.
That's right.
So, but first quarter of 2020.
So it'll happen.
Thank
Can
you.
you store it in there and then,
I don't think so.
Thank you, Mark.
That's
All right.
a good question.
I'd like to invite Jim. Would you like to pull a chair up? This is for the cinematographer's benefit and for the town indirectly, so. Jim Hood,
We're gonna
thank you.
start with water.
You have to be on the budget.
We're gonna start with water.
If possible,
You're a videographer.
yeah, if possible, if we go to the,
Fred, she's a videographer.
of course you are,
Reflect. Okay, so are we
and a
gonna start,
highly respected one too, may I say.
are we gonna start with water or wastewater?
I think water. Sorry, but you got a dog. Jim does not have a dog to play with, so, got no dog in this one.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so where are we with page?
Water
Well,
enterprise.
That's a good question.
It's under
Um,
enterprise funds for the water,
Second page.
and it's the first one of the two.
Got it.
Okay.
442, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm a little confused in the document, it says we don't have a budget,
Well,
and yet on,
this is the town administrator's budget.
That's the only thing that I have at this point.
So you haven't developed your own,
well, it says
No,
department
because
two.
Normally, when I
Oh,
develop
I
a
see,
budget,
zeros.
when I had, my own work, when I had done this, I would be working from actuals, from year-to-date actuals, and we don't have any of those yet.
So if you think it's premature to like discuss.
So
in
Well,
order-
I went over it, and I have some thoughts on it.
Okay,
Okay.
that would be fine.
But then what are these actuals that are in here right now, FY
That's-
2019? Is that just
that's a past year, that's a
Past
year
year,
that's
okay.
closed out.
Okay, so there's nothing for 2020 yet
Mhm.
in here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm making assumptions that it's been level over the years, so, we're waiting to get that report. And I don't expect any major or significant changes on this, except in the area of repairs and maintenance, the contingency for that. And I will go over the factors that are involved in that. I see the town administrator has in there that Dan has, budget for total expenses at 284,000, which is close to what was budgeted for last year and the actuals. So I would just say that the concerns that we have this year, we've had a number of issues come up around infrastructure and repairs and some maintenance work that's had to be done, including replacement of the original pump that we had at one of the wells at the Coles Neck or Gristmill Way site. And that was a cost of about $9,000 to replace that.
That's the original water system.
The original water system and the original pump.
And how many years did we get out of that pump?
1989, that pump went in.
That pump does not owe us anything.
Yeah. It's a bargain, and it's a fairly deep well, it's a 150-foot well, so that they had to bring in
That
some fairly
$9,000
heavy-duty
is
equipment to get this out. And
It's actually a relatively small repair for what could go
then
wrong.
when the Cumberland Farms project got underway, we had asked them, Cumberland Farms said that they would pay for the water, for the water main. We had asked them to take the water main across the road, Route 6, so that we were covered for those properties that were on the opposite side of Route 6, on the west side. So it would be the town's responsibility then to hook anybody up over there. So there are curb stops on that side of the road now. They brought the water main back over in front of Cumberland Farms. And that was all taken care of by Cumberland Farms. The only thing that we paid in conjunction was that Chief Polly had asked if we would have a hydrant put in at the corner of Route 6 and Pine Point Road on that side of the road. So that was at a cost of, I believe, $4,500.
But that's all in the current year's budget.
That would be in the current year. So
So now we're looking at 2021, the next
right,
year's
and
budget.
those are the things that I'm going to speak to now.
Okay.
And then we had an additional curb stop that we had to put in this year out on Coles Neck Road, one of the properties that was adjacent to the landfill out there that did not have a curb stop, so that cost us about $4,500 as well to do that. So what's additional work that is going to be required in the coming year? In addition to the new well pump at Gristmill Way, there was a problem with one of the components of the SCADA system. That's the Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Program that we have that covers all of the sites. However, that was installed piecemeal over the years. The original piece for the Gristmill Way site then the additional one for the water tower and the.
So it never got when we put in the larger system, it never got a full upgrade, it just
It
got
never
an
got a full
add-on.
upgrade, so we've had issues with that now.
Not surprising.
And one of the components at the Gristmill Way site failed this past year.
So are
And,
we getting a new integrated,
Right, and the
Yeah.
cost of that, the estimate on the cost of that is $45,000 to upgrade the entire system. That will bring us into compliance with DEP requirements, as well as to address the additional needs. Like we had a few problems this summer. One back in July with the pump at the water tower failed to turn on over the July 4th weekend.
oops,
And the tank was nearly empty by Monday morning.
wow.
And so the problem with it was the communication in the system, that Whitewater didn't get notified that that the pump had failed to turn on.
So there was
That's
a,
part of the SCADA system that
Okay,
needs
okay.
to be upgraded. In addition, there was some components that DEP is now requiring that we have to put into this system.
so an
Is-
unfunded mandate.
Is that 45K gonna be asked for in a,
We're doing the RFP for that now.
Is that gonna be a
Will we see it in the
capital
warrant
expenditure?
this
It will be
year?
in the, will it be in the capital budget or in the,
I think that's a repair and maintenance, so it would be in the, it would be capital because it's a replacement and it's a
it's a big
major piece
ticket,
of
yeah.
equipment.
So that's going in the capital budget.
Yeah.
When you get a chance, would you just give us a written summary of that to put in here so
Right,
we,
in the report that we do, we'll have that included in there. that wants
So
to
it's
be-
currently not in the capital budget, right?
There's nothing in there now.
No, and we need to do that this coming year, right?
Yes, that'll have to happen.
He's gonna put in maintenance.
You're gonna put it under maintenance under this budget?
Well, I think it is a capital,
I think it is a capital item.
It's not.
It does, I mean,
So it's kind of.
What's the difference? if it has to get done immediately, and you put it on your capital 5-year plan, it has to
Yeah,
get.
there's
it's
kind of-
getting
almost like
around
a-
it.
Right, no, I know,
It should be in
I know.
as maintenance,
But I,
even though it is a capital.
it has to show up somewhere if it's
Yeah.
gonna get done, and we've already looked at the capital budget at this point, and
Do we know what the balance is in the water enterprise fund?
no, I don't have that. I've asked about that, and that's one of the concerns
Yeah.
that the Water Commission has at this point, that we don't have a reserve, or we're not,
Enough
and we're
reserve?
supposed to be building a reserve based on what the USDA expects from us.
So I'd like to find out when was the last time we actually took money out of the water enterprise fund, too. So we need to know balance and last withdrawal.
We've asked for this, but I
Okay.
think the issue is that there's some issue with the software
Okay,
right now.
The accountants.
yes, we
Transfer.
heard
We've heard
that.
that.
So when he asks, we don't have any
The
numbers.
challenges of the new town accountant.
oh, yeah, the timing is just awful.
Yeah.
Are there any new
He wasn't able
hookups?
to,
Yes,
Yeah,
well,
that's-
so far this year,
That's what I
just,
think.
I would say the good thing is that we've had 14 new hookups. Either they're in the process now or they've been completed
They've signed contracts.
in the current year.
for
So that's
for fiscal
about-
2020.
That's about $80,000
Nice.
for us.
So what's the total now of the 14?
The total number of
Total.
hookups, do you know?
Total number of hook.
Ballpark?
I believe it's about, as I said, with the 14, we were at around 250, so we're at probably 265, so in that neighborhood.
And with this new extension over by Cumbies, any of those properties, do they?
We have not offered them
Yeah,
water
okay.
yet, because we haven't, that
Wait till
hasn't been
it's
turned on.
online.
Wait till they put a bike
Oh,
there.
sure they want it.
Oh, it's not online already?
Not everybody
No,
wants
not
it.
everybody
Cumbies.
wants it.
Cumbies wants it,
Cumbies.
but they haven't started using the water yet.
Bay sales?
Bay sales, that's the other piece. Lyle Butts did have the main extended from Cumberland Farms to his property. at
So-
his expense.
So those
That's
two may
good.
come online in 2021, the
Yes.
fiscal 2021
So
year.
they're
Those are-
going the other way? Cause what about PJ's on the corner?
PJ's is done,
Oh, okay.
because PJ's gets it off of Cahoon Hollow Road.
Oh, all right.
So the 14, I mean, most of these did not cost us anything to do, they were just, and they
That's
paid the
nice.
connection
That's
fees.
That's great, whoever negotiated that,
Correct.
thank you.
So, couple of things that jump out, you know, if you, and understanding that there's a line of zeros that run through the 2021 department at the moment, but that still kind of jump out is a increase, and I think there's been an increase over time on the general subsidy, general fund subsidy.
Yeah, but we knew that.
And nevertheless, and that loan repayments have gone down significantly.
The loan repayments meaning those are the deferred payments that
Yeah.
that we get.
Which is just other way of saying that revenues seem to be declining. Now, I understand with 80K, that will be modified somewhat, but the request at town meeting for monies to balance things tends to go up over time.
Yes.
So, because I kind of remember 5-6 years ago it was in the $75,000-$80,000
It actually
range.
is down a little bit this year, but if that number.
Well, we don't know if this
holds.
number's real though,
Right.
that's the thing.
That's correct.
So,
Well, aren't you running out of revenue too for some of the people who
But
didn't
one of the
pay?
things I want to speak to the issue of the loan repayments.
That-
But some of those folks have already finished off,
Yeah.
paid off
Yeah,
theirs.
so they're-
So
That's
that's
why you're gonna see a
decreased.
decrease.
Right.
sure,
Yeah.
Because some of those were folks who came on in 2010, had a 10-year,
Yep.
deferred payment plan, and now have finished paying that off. So we're seeing a fall off of the number of properties that
Right.
are.
We're getting less of that back.
Yeah.
well, and I guess the theme that has recurred year over year is, will the water enterprise fund ever be really sustainable in the sense that we bring enough revenue in to offset the cost? But then, if you ever had to expand it, is there a different model that would make it sustainable
Well,
going forward?
that's why we came to the town the last town meeting and asked for funds for a consultant to assist us with the financial.
So
Yes.
That's a question I know. Did you use that 30,000?
We're in the process of interviewing
Okay.
potential consultants for that at this point.
Fred,
Yes.
as a former water commissioner and someone who's very familiar with the system, I'd like to say that, first of all, the select board hasn't heard about a consultant being the one that we might use. But if you have use for a consultant on a short-term basis, that's legit, and you'll place your request. The thing I'm really worried about here,
Helen, I just want to remind you, we did put money aside.
yes, I know, I was
120,
there.
30 to go.
Yes, I was
Right.
there, but
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be spent, but if they have good use for it, it will be, okay? But one of the things I'm most concerned about is that the existing system does not get overused and gallons per day go either because of leaks or because of overcommitment. Because that would mean we'd need a new well. My hair is standing on end at the thought of, in the middle of the summer, when there is no effective recharge of groundwater, the water tank was completely empty. And what this does is, it takes from the zones of contribution of the various wells all at once to slowly fill it back up, right? And that is very worrisome, and I'm wondering, through you, Fred, because this is all about future costs that could potentially occur because the resource is overused, right? Inadvertently, because too many people are hooked up simply to keep the enterprise fund up. So that's my first thought. My second thought is, and I was a water commissioner when this large expansion to the municipal water system occurred back in the early 2000s. And it was very clear to the people on the Water Issues Advisory Committee that I was on before I was a water commissioner, that the model that was passed and accepted by town meeting would always have the town paying for some of it. We decided not to have betterments, which was actually environmentally a good idea for a variety of reasons. We don't have to go there, but I can talk to you anytime you want me to about that. And then give you my opinion on it, which is another thing. But the point is, we will always, no matter how carefully the water commissioners work at not spending money where it isn't needed, we will always have to pick up some of the pieces. The town will have to pick up some of the pieces.
Point of order, I'm really sorry, and I know that this is important, but this is beyond the scope of our meeting this evening. We really are here to talk about the budget. We have another guest to talk about the budget, and I think that it's, what Helen's talking about is extremely important, but it's really beyond the scope of our budget right now, and so I'd
Yeah.
like to move on.
And I think the question I have relative to the budget is hard to answer right now because we don't have an actual budget at this point to evaluate. So we are to some degree foundering on suppositions about will this be more, will this be less, and whatever. Would it make sense, once we have these numbers in place, to have you come back for a few minutes and
Absolutely, I'm happy to do that.
and give us a real budget, because I don't want to waste the time of the committee here.
But I just want to make a point on this. I don't agree with Helen's comments with regard to the water supply here in the town of Wellfleet. In fact, we could spend more money to figure out exactly what the potential is for a water system here, because it's been done. There's a lot of there's a lot of work that's been done out there on this. We know what our wells will produce at this point. That's not an issue. There's no significant drain on the water table from the existing system. We're now talking about expanding the system in order to accommodate affordable housing. Elaine McElroy and I put together an application and got $100,000 in funding for engineering costs that are not reflected in this yet, but that's part of this year's funding that we received. We will be going out to Mass Works for additional funding in order to cover the cost of the upgrades to the system that are necessary. We have to do these things. I'm saying this because I've looked into this with DEP. We are out of compliance in terms of our redundant water supply. So either we take people offline and say we can't serve any more people on the water system, and we don't do a housing project. That's the reality. Or we put in wells up on Lawrence Road for affordable housing, which is not what has been advised.
And I think to that point, and at this point, we'll table this conversation for a later date, but to that point, there's sort of two shoes dropping here. One is looking at this year's budget, when we have one, and say, if you just look at it across 19, 20, 21, it looks like there are marginal increases in that, at least in the operational end of it. There are questions about revenues to offset those, because that then drives the request at town meeting, right? But then beyond that, to address the things you're talking about, to hear a little more about 2, 3, 4 years out, if you see the cost of expansion coming up and there are offsets to that based on grants you're getting or whatever, that's just useful information to have in the record. It doesn't mean it has to be 100% right. It just means we start to get a sense of where things are going.
Fred, can I make one comment?
Sure.
So this is relative to the request for consulting fees, and you accurately described what's going on with the basic financial model, which is we are getting less and less payments from, in terms of folks that had signed up for water and, had prepaid for the service, and so they paid off their notes, and that revenue is declining. That was a big failure in terms of the financial model, because obviously that's not sustainable. Going forward, once people are paid off, how are you going to pay for the system? So the point about the consulting is to be able to think more rationally about How can we add more? I think if we did some rough numbers, if we had about 50 to 70 customers, and some slight changes in rates, we can get the water system to a break-even point. In order to do that, this goes back to having a consultant look at our cost of service, look at the legal impacts that we would have in terms of trying to change rates and do away with the connection fee. So there are a variety of complicated issues to move from a bad financial model to a good financial model going forward. And so, you characterized it exactly right, but.
And I think we understand that it's premature for us to be asking those questions, because the consulting hasn't been done, because we don't have the budget, whatever, that's okay. And to Ira's point, I think we can table this for now and move on. But it's something we'll come back and visit, because these are real numbers at some point. And,
Keep in mind that it's a pretty good deal for the town. Take a look at what's going on in Eastham
at the moment,
at the moment.
yeah. Thank you.
Just point out that Truro and Brewster both got very substantial grants through Mass Works
Yep.
for their,
For the expansion
projects.
into the.
And that
into the
includes money
projects,
for
yeah,
water.
The new projects. And since we will be coming into that in a different fiscal year, we've got a pretty good shot at getting a grant as well,
Right.
from my understanding. So-
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
I hope this wasn't,
job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
As soon as I get some numbers from.
Appreciate
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kurt.
Come on down.
Just want the record to show that your dog spent about 3 minutes cleaning my left hand.
Do you have any numbers from us at all?
No, not at all.
Oh, he's short and sweet.
Yeah.
Then we're all on the same page.
Well, we'd actually
We
like to
didn't
know what's
really-
going on though,
Yeah.
because part of this goes to our strategic planning.
So, let me give you the bad news first. The DEP has basically been pushing the wastewater committee to but is requiring us to do an analysis to look at hooking up the entire town to a sewer system. So they want that as the backup, for anything that we do, which changes the cost from something that might look like $60 million to something that looks like probably $150 million. And it's required us to spend some unexpected amounts in consulting fees to be able to further characterize the transfer station site, and start to look at how we would do a full build out for something like that. So that work's in process. We've had 2 amendments to our consultant's contract to accommodate that, as well as to accommodate doing significantly more outreach to the town with a proposed set of alternatives. So the bad news is, the cost of a sewer system keeps going up. The other bad news is we're spending more on consultants to characterize things and to do more vetting in town and get out to more public meetings.
Is that utilizing the 75,000 that was approved last year?
Using the amount that's approved,
I
yeah.
thought it was 90. It was a total of 120, wasn't
The
it?
total 120, and then
30 to 1 and
Oh.
so, and
I could be wrong.
I didn't actually know I was on the docket tonight, so I don't have the numbers in front of me.
We were surprised you even had a budget.
So anyway, the other piece of bad news is that we have substantially declining water quality in the harbor. Bob will be the first to tell you in terms of how Black Mayo and that sort of thing might be affecting his business, but we've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of sediments. We have seen a significant increase in the amount of nitrogen in the harbor. Most of what we're seeing in terms of water quality is not good.
Is this how much of that's gonna be alleviated by dredging if and when that gets done?
Well, that's an interesting point. Everybody recognizes that when you pull a cubic yard of sediments out, you actually remove nitrogen.
Right.
There is a nitrogen content in those sediments.
That's what I assume.
And DEP, right now, and I was pushing for this when I was on the Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative, to have something in our matrix that says if you do dredging, here's what the credit would be. And unfortunately, the science or the numbers seem to be all over the place. Nobody was comfortable kind of putting a number on that. So we will be looking at the sediments, getting some numbers, and going back to DEP to say, here's what our numbers are. So for 550,000 cubic yards, you know, over a 3-year period, we think this is going to be worth this amount of nitrogen, to at least try to get the credit for it. There's no guarantee they'll say yes. I suspect, though, with some good analysis that that they probably will. They've been fairly flexible, so.
Not for nothing, but the state might believe the numbers more if they funded the study.
It's already been funded to be able to take it out and put it somewhere else in the first place.
Right.
All that criteria for analysis, size of the sediment, what it's composed of, and the state requires that, so now they're gonna back up their own data.
Well, they don't analyze it for nitrogen, though.
Well, they should.
So they should. So anyway, we're going to work on that. You know,
So I
obviously
don't know who does the analysis for the state, but
we can get the analysis done. You know, we're working on that. So all I'm saying is we can't promise anything, but we're going to make sure we, stand there at the plate and swing really hard at that ball to make sure we get as much credit as we can. And that could be a substantial number, in terms of ultimately seeing some significant improvement in the harbor in general. The one thing I want to caution everybody about, though, is that, even once we dredge, I think that we're going to see some immediate benefits. But one of the things that we've really got to start to get serious about is having, good ecosystem function in the harbor, which we just don't have. We have. I don't want to go into a long sidebar on that, but our ecosystem function is really the critical piece. We're not filtering out those sediments, and as a result, we've got too much nutrient. We're not filtering out the sediments. The combination of those two things is what's continually leading us to have to either redredge the harbor or deal with the off odors that we have in a lot of our estuaries, whether it's Duck Creek, Blackfish Creek. Those areas, when you drive by on Route 6, anybody knows it's low tide in Wellfleet. So anyway, we've got to improve that ecosystem function. That's a critical thing. But anyway, what I wanted to come tell you folks is, in terms of looking at where we're likely to be in 2-3 years, we're going to need to start budgeting for wastewater programs. And so that means, for example, we had two very exciting things that I want to share. One is having to do with what we'll call enhanced innovative alternative septic systems. And that's different than what we all know about, which is IA systems, which are the innovative alternative systems. So George Hoyfelder and a number of other people have been working on something that introduces carbon and denitrification into a standard septic system.
sawdust, right?
Right. Those are producing about 80 to 90% reduction in nitrogen.
I know they've been used in other parts of the state.
Well, they're only in test at this point, and what I want to do is when I come back, we'll bring Scott in and have him actually go through some of this stuff to get some detail on it. But the long and short of it is that that's actually a better removal rate than a standard sewage treatment plant. So there are alternative ways that are substantially less expensive.
I had heard about these.
And
I'm glad you heard
probably within the next 2 to 3 years, the hope is that we would be able to get those into general use. Hillary right now can get them approved on a conditional basis anyway. The Board of Health was very excited about trying to do that, so we may see some regulatory changes to try to get that going. What it means is that's when Scott did his analysis of new construction and failed septic systems for looking at numbers for what that might mean directionally. It could be as much as a third of what we need to remove for nitrogen. So it's a pretty substantial program. But a program like that's going to take money because there's about a 50% increase in the cost of that system versus a standard system. My argument would be is if we're going to spend $150 million on a traditional sewer system, anybody who's doing that incremental improvement ought to get some relief, because that's really our wastewater treatment system.
Yeah.
Well, a few questions, and I don't know what order
I
to
guess
put them in, but one of the, be respectful of Woody's issue about the proper,
No, I'm interested in dumping sawdust in my septic.
Well, I'm wondering if it can come from something.
No, I guess what I wanna say is that
That's where I went.
the FinCom to some degree is stepping out of bounds in asking where the big costs are coming in the next 2 to 3, 4 years. And as you express them, some of them are speculative, because if we do this, then we don't spend as much on that. But if we don't, perhaps we spend $150 million on a sewer system because the state will come in and say you must. And I pulled an article about 5 or 6 months ago. You had a meeting with the state, and they were saying they needed to see more, as I recall. They wanted a more concrete plan. And
Yes, they did. and
Yeah,
we
that's
don't
that's
have-
the they wanted a larger
Yeah,
Yes.
larger
that's what
design
the
So-
additional cost of
and
consulting is.
more characterization of the transfer station site to be able to actually receive that amount of.
so, like, as in art, where in perspective all lines lead to a point on the horizon, if the state's moving faster than we are, then at some point they can mandate a cost potentially that we are not necessarily prepared to pay, but
Yeah, they're
we
not.
might mitigate if we had another year or two. And I guess that's part of what I'd love to understand.
Yeah, they're
is-
not. They're not. It's what they were doing was basically saying what they want to see in our watershed permit, and the watershed permit is something that we're working on, basically to come to an agreement with DEP on what our backup plan looks like and what our actual programs look like to meet a 10,000 kilograms per year removal of nitrogen. So they're not ahead of us. They're not going to come in and mandate anything at this point. In fact, we'd only be the second town to get a watershed permit on the Cape. DEP's been very
I know we
excited.
talked about this
Yeah,
last
so
year.
we're at the front end. What the watershed permit allows us to do though, Fred, is be able to start to access grant funds for some of our programs, especially the alternatives. So, for example, we may be able to get grant funds to pay that 50% increase in an enhanced septic system. But what I am saying is, I'm trying not to be obtuse, but we have never budgeted for wastewater, and what I'm trying to communicate is we're gonna need to start budgeting for wastewater. We are gonna need to do programs, and for example, one of the options that we're looking at is doing what they call a nitrix barrier, so that's a system. It's something that basically it's like vegetable oil that you would inject every 10 feet, which you could do from the mobile station all the way around down Commercial Street and all the way around to Keller's Corner, so now we know where it is. That particular area is one of the highest density areas in the town. It's also impacting our most impacted watershed, which is the Mayo Duck Creek area. What that does
act
is
as a barrier?
what it does is it acts just like the sawdust in a septic system.
Okay.
You put that carbon in there, and the nitrogen that's coming in the groundwater gets converted. The nitrogen actually
Oh.
turns into nitrogen gas and doesn't end up in the harbor. So
Okay,
it's very
you can't do
innovative.
any of these things until you get the watershed permit, right?
We would not be doing them until we get the watershed permit.
Right.
But we have
So
to.
what-
And we're waiting on the consulting to give us,
The consultant thinks we're within 6 months to a year to getting
To
the
getting
watershed
the permit, okay. What
Yeah.
happened to that model that was supposed to be submitted to the Cape Cod Commission that was quote-unquote our plan?
The model is evolving.
It's
What they're
evolving.
using is
Right, and don't you need to submit that to the Cape Cod Commission for their approval of that as well?
We're working with them, actually.
Right.
So basically, the model is what we're using,
Yeah?
and what we're doing
So
is
how
plug.
close are you to submit that model?
Well, the model it just tells you how much nitrogen a given.
Right, but isn't this part of the whole
Can you let
process?
him answer, please?
It's,
Please don't interrupt.
well, the model is what you use to develop a plan, right?
Right,
So what you do is you say, okay, I want to do a nitrix barrier, I want to cover this area. You do that within the model, and then it tells you
Right.
how much nitrogen that removes. So you keep doing other pieces, say for example, an enhanced oyster harvest, restoration of a salt marsh,
mhm,
a new innovative alternative plan with enhanced septics. each thing that you propose goes into the model,
Mhm.
and then they'll do numbers based on our build rate, based on the failure rate of septic systems, because the data's in the, in the Cape Cod Commission.
Mhm.
And so you're working through an iterative process to come up with a plan that meets that 10,000 kilogram requirement.
Right.
So the
Plans
model-
always evolve.
Yeah, and the model is just how you get the numbers for DEP to say, okay, yep, that's 5,000 there, that's
Mhm.
2,000 here, that's 1,000 here, that's 3,000 there. The model produces those numbers for you.
Wasn't massive amounts of culch in the model 3-4 years ago?
Well, yeah, they were conceptual ideas that had reasonable numbers attached to them, and now what's happening is we're putting them into the Cape Cod Commission's model with what they finally decided are now the approved numbers, so that any program that we're looking at now has sort of DEP certification, Cape Cod Commission certification to say that's what we're going to give you credit for. So the models.
So in other words, you keep adding to the model.
Well,
You keep adding technology or.
there's about 40 technologies now that are available to us to evaluate, which is a big change. So yes, there are technologies that are being added. But when this started, we just had some back of the envelope numbers that said, hey, wait a second, guys, if we do this, we could.
Yeah.
So
See,
it's,
everything changes. This is why, and I just want to say in a very mild way, this is why I'm skeptical of this strategic plan. Because a strategic plan, in my understanding, would mean that we were being proactive. It's a plan. So we would have to consider revenue as well as all these expenses. But we really, as we go forward, we're just hearing numbers week after week. So we keep adding. I'm not exactly understanding what we're supposed to be
I think
presenting
the problem
to
may
the
be,
town.
I think
Can
the
I-
problem may be this, Ira.
I'd like to read.
Using the word plan suggests that we're planning. If I were to interject the word perspective instead of plan and just say, look, what we're really trying to do here, and I think it's fair, is we hear a variety of things about initiatives or problems the town may face in the next 2, 3, 4 years. That could be $160 million for a sewer system, $20 or more million for dredging. But they are related to each other in some way.
Okay.
Because if the dredging mitigates the problem with the nitrogen, then perhaps we aren't facing a sewer system, or we're facing a $60 million instead of a $150 million sewer system. It's not like we're saying do this or do that. It's more like we're saying we're hearing all of these things. Let's put them down in a document that just says we're hearing all these things. You should know as a town that these things are related to each other and be aware of them, because you don't want to get smacked upside the head the year it happens. Like we're about to get smacked upside the head by a school budget for a new high school that last year was 50 million and is 150 million this year. It's like, I'm sure it's worth 150 million, and we'll find out next month. But bottom line is 100 million extra on the bottom line. We don't have to pay it all, but we gotta pay some of it. Anyway, just saying.
I just wanted to say, I understand when we're here and we're sitting around the desk, but let me put my perspective on the strategic plan. Before I was involved in the finance committee, before everything was televised, I would come to town meeting, I would hear how much, and for me, a numbers person, that wasn't it wasn't in context for me, because I was voting on something, but my question was, well, how many police cars do we have, and why are we not on that kind of rotating system? So to be involved in this, I think it's important to the two things that we've added is televising this,
Yes.
so that people can see our deliberations if they are at all interested in that.
And so that they
And
can
the
understand
strategic
better.
planning to understand exactly how Fred said it, that, you know what, this might be coming down the pike, so this year, if you think everything looks good, and, we have a surplus, or we've, got a great bond rating, or we paid some debt down, that doesn't automatically mean that in the next 5 years, there isn't the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious thing coming down the pike, and I think it's
I mean, on
informative.
some level, I think we're just
Gives you
publishing scary
context.
rumors. I mean, it's not like we're saying
But
it's gonna go this way or the other way. That's up to the selectmen, it's up to the TA, it's
Yeah,
up
but at least it
to, it's
gives
up
us
to the
great
science.
context.
Less
However, it goes
comfortable
down
with it.
significantly, so.
It's
might
great
as
in,
well.
I think it's great in, it's the next question to ask in the context in which we sit. And as an advisory board,
People
It-
don't like
Yeah, Bob.
surprises, and being surprised will paralyze people. It is much better for them to have heard about things years in, some years in advance.
Okay, I believe in the wisdom of the group, and if the group is comfortable with it, that's fine. I'm not exactly sure that we're communicating anything that's meaningful to people. However, if the group feels good about it, I feel
Well-
good about the group.
Fred?
It sounds like what this committee is trying to do is to avoid $100 million
Yeah.
septic system, sewage system.
Yeah,
So if it's a change in flux and always evolving, I'm fine with that, and it's the new technologies. Now, my question is, so you have a couple new technologies, probably the most highest contributors to the nitrogen problem is adjacent to the water itself in the center of town. So when have a failed septic system, so if it comes to the Conservation Commission, what would it take to say, okay, you have to do this new technology and have it allowable and perhaps funded, or the increase would be coming from an outside grant, say, okay,
Yeah.
it's 50% more, but it's gonna be, you're not gonna pay any more, but this is gonna happen. These are the things that take a lot of work between the Board of Health and the Conservation Commission to pull it off, but the bottom line is, that's what's gonna make my oasis sellable 10 years from now, or polluted.
So
That's
Fred-
why I'm
You're not
interested.
retired? Thank you.
Well, all right, 8 years.
Fred? So the thing that hasn't come up is that this cycle for DEP review, it goes on 5-year cycles. This is straight from the DEP, and it's been brought up at every other meeting about this, okay? And, Kurt's put out a lot of information, but you didn't get that one out. So they're gonna look at this over a period of about 20 years. And meanwhile, it's adaptive management. In other words, we're gonna start doing more, but the punchline is we have more IAs than, almost any other place on the
Yeah.
coast. And IAs, alternative systems. The other thing I want to tell you all that will make this a lot clearer is on the wastewater committee's website is the most recent presentation by Scott Horsley, which I've now sat through twice. And it's good, it's PowerPoint, and it's really worth looking at, because Kurt touched on a bunch of it, but,
Yeah, what I want to do is have Scott come in so that, we can get a little bit more granular, Ira. We're getting to a point where I think we've got enough specificity. We're just trying to make sure that we get the 10,000 kilograms. And, it's a variety of different stuff. And DEP is excited, to work with us on that. If we get our watershed, if we can show that we can meet that requirement and have a watershed permit that DEP says they can accept, then it's gonna open up grant opportunities and other opportunities for us to substantially reduce the cost. But, what I just wanna say out loud is, we need to be thinking about probably like 10% of 150 million for what a wastewater plan is gonna require to implement, using alternatives. Our hope is to go to town meeting next, not this one, but the following, to say, here are the technologies, here's the path forward, and budget in a way that wouldn't be like coming to town meeting and saying, we need $10 million today. But instead say, we're gonna do this demonstration thing in this location, which DEP has said you can do, and it's just a path to compliance. But it's a path to compliance that's significantly less expensive for the town.
Just a request, would you be willing to work on that as if it was your 5-year capital improvement plan, just as far as tracking it out? I mean, we realize that these are gonna change, but that would at least give us something to put in front of us that we could understand.
That's actually what I want to have Scott come and present to you.
Yeah, I was gonna say
next
something
time.
similar as
Just
you
basically just say what, here's the.
You referred to a couple of timelines at this point in terms of when the consultant said you might have the watershed permit and 2 to 3 years budgeting for a wastewater plan and so on and so on. It would be really nice to see this kind of laid out. And to the
5
degree
or
that,
10 year,
to the
10
degree that you
whatever,
can even
definitely.
put money
Probably.
to attach some guesstimate of what it would cost, that would be hugely helpful.
See,
Obviously, the
my-
further out, the more of a guess, but.
My frustration in all this, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, is the town's just spent $500,000 and we still don't have, close to the watershed plan. That last year, you said we had a plan and turns out we don't. There's all these little things, and I
No,
understand you gotta iron those out, but we did spend $500,000 to get to this point.
So let me comment on that. First of all, we have had a plan that we ultimately had to get regulatory approval, changes in
Right.
regulations to be able to accept.
Okay,
So that's what we did for the last 5 or 7 years.
okay.
Because we wouldn't have been able to do that. So salt marsh restoration, nitrix barriers,
So those have been
taking
approved.
advantage of oysters, not legal when we started the process. We said, we think these things are reasonable to pursue.
Mhm.
So what we did was get the Cape Cod Commission and DEP to agree. So those are now options for us that didn't exist before. That's what we did. So that was the plan. The plan worked.
Okay.
And we have been successful in obtaining now legal approval to pursue these things. Huge change.
Mhm.
Second part is the $500,000, yeah. We're all frustrated as the cows come home because over the last 5 years, the process has been changed from one where DEP would say, you need to build a sewer, here's how big it needs to be,
Yeah, that's
and
the
here's what
one.
it's gonna cost you. So that's what the status quo was when we started this process. Now, we have spent $500,000. Fortunately, a lot of that money went toward looking at alternatives and finding alternatives
Mhm.
that we are now legally allowed to pursue. So it wasn't all wasted, but the regulatory goalposts kept shifting over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Right.
We now have at least certainty over the regulatory goalposts. We now have, an objective model to be able to run these technologies through, to say in a given jurisdiction, in a given location, with a given size of a program, here's what you can get credit for from DEP.
Because that all had to be
So
built
that all
from
had to be
ground up.
built, and that only got finished about 2 years ago. So I realize everybody's frustrated because they keep changing the goalposts, and we've just been fighting. We've had our shoulder pads and helmets
It's
on, just trying
getting
to
clear,
move
it's
forward.
just a little, it was pretty nebulous last 2 years.
Really
It
good
has
focus,
been.
good, yeah.
That
It has been.
$500,000 did not put things in the ground which we have to maintain. So.
Or things
No,
that
I
didn't
get
give us
that
credit.
point, but-
Right.
So I have a
No,
question
that is
and a
hell of
request, I
lot.
guess. The question is, and I'm gonna apologize for my and maybe the ignorance of other people. You mentioned that you have a budget. Do you actually have a budget?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
We don't have a
Where'd that come
wastewater, we don't have a wastewater budget. There are monies that have been allocated to wastewater for
Yeah.
consulting
All right,
services.
yeah.
There have
Okay.
been monies that have been allocated to wastewater for the development of,
They have an impact.
Waste-
on
So it was
the-
like a joke when you
But we
said,
don't actually have a
I didn't
committee
know I
budget.
was gonna have to bring a budget, got
Which
it.
gets me
We
to
don't
the
have a committee
question that I
budget.
do have.
The committee is just volunteers. That
Yes,
we
that's
don't,
what-
the committee doesn't have a budget.
That's what I thought.
But you don't have a budget like a town department, but you do impact the budget, so.
Yeah,
that's
I'm
why
sorry,
you're here.
Stephen.
But just that now we're eligible for that 2.75% and it's specifically for Cape Cod and Island Water Protection. It's called the Cape Cod and Island Water Protection Fund.
Right. And so in order to
So-
access that, we have to have a watershed permit.
Okay.
That's 22.
Shades of
So-
Joseph Heller.
Yeah,
So then I would say the urgency would be to get that because
Right.
that's our
Yeah,
kitty
let's
of
get some
cash.
money.
amen.
So, let me throw this out to you and Jim and the committee. I just noticed that we have a meeting scheduled I guess it would be the 4th Wednesday of February, which is the 26th. But we don't have any departmental reviews scheduled for that night, as far as I know.
Correct.
But we are going to have to get to our budget recommendations and whatever anyway. Would it be appropriate for you guys to come back on the 26th of February?
I'm not available that week.
Okay,
Well, I'm hoping that you'll have as the water commissioners will have a budget before then, but,
well, perhaps we can slot you in then somewhere else and move things around a little bit. Would you be able to come back on the 26th? And is that along with doing the thumbs up, thumbs down on all the budgets we've heard at that point? for that evening? Is that an agenda you guys can live with?
I'm fine.
That worked
Sorry,
for
what
me.
day was this?
This is the 26th.
February 26th, the last week.
We have a meeting on the 12th, the 19th, and we had no departmental reviews scheduled for the 26th, which would be a good time to kind of go through all of the budgets and say, where are we on them? But we could, I think, also
Yeah,
get
it's
Kurt
not-
in there and get more concrete information about this without beating a dead horse tonight.
I do have one last question for Kurt. It should be an easy one.
Yeah, I think I can make it.
Okay.
My last question for you is, are you coming before town meetings, you're asking for any
No,
funds? So there's no warrant article related to you?
no, I think we've got adequate funding to get us to a watershed permit with what was allocated last town meeting.
So
So
this is,
do we
this is
need-
all gonna be in interest of information.
Yeah, so do we
future
need to
planning.
do we need to do it that,
It could wait until after we vote the budget.
Or I like your idea of the 5-year, your 5-year. plan
Right.
ahead of time.
Yeah, and that's
So
what we'll
that
hopefully
everybody's
see
able
on
to
the
get that.
26th.
But why don't
we-
But it's not impacting.
it's
the
not
The
impacting
warrant.
the budget, so
Yeah,
why
it's
is
not
there a
gonna-
If it had
rush?
to wait until after we take care of our budgeting stuff, it could.
Correct.
Yeah, this isn't something that's gonna impact the warrant. And in terms of like trying to give you a vision on the budget, what we're gonna do is at least get an assessment of what, sort of an idealized watershed permit set of programs would look like and start to develop what those costs look like. It's gonna be a little premature to try to allocate those, over time. I mean, we can give you some, by 5 years, DEP is gonna expect us to have had, a certain level of accomplishment.
Right.
But, as Helen said, the whole process is, adaptive. You start out doing something, you
where it
put
gets
some,
you.
you put something in the ground, you measure it. If it's meeting the expected metrics for removal, then you expand it, If it isn't, you have to decide whether you're gonna continue or not.
Right.
If it exceeds, then so much the better.
And on another subject in that vein, we'll have talked to hopefully the dredging committee by the time we see you again, and we'll have whatever the current thinking is on
But my
when,
thought,
how much, and so on, and.
my thought is that, if we wait to bring them in with Scott, until after we've taken care of all the warrant issues, we will be able to give them our full time and attention and not have to be on a tight time schedule.
I think that's more, I agree.
And we may have it may be a lot of information.
Well, we have a meeting in March, we could hold off till March, and just use the last meeting in February to go through the warrant.
Just remember, there'll be all
And the departmental
articles,
budgets and so on.
Yeah, and because there'll be the warrant articles.
Who's taking minutes?
Aside. that
What?
are also-
Who's taking minutes?
Actually, indirectly, Rebecca is.
Oh,
She's
okay.
gonna watch
She's
the-
gonna watch the
Thank you, Rebecca.
warrant.
Thanks, Rebecca,
She's
great
going to
job
be
tonight.
watching the video and taking minutes off
I'm
of
like all of a
this.
sudden I just
Poor
realized
Rebecca.
it wasn't
No,
here.
I'm so
this is what
sorry
she
for
said. Yeah.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to mention for anybody who's interested, Scott did a great presentation at a joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen, Board of Health, and Conservation Commission the other week. And Mia, is that available online now?
Yeah, as well as the one that he did,
Oh, there's a link on the
Maybe
website.
that would be a
committee
thing to
website.
do.
as well as
So
the one that
it's-
he did for you guys before. They're both available on the town's website on the video on demand link.
There you go.
Okay.
There you
So,
go.
yeah, let me
Um,
ask, would he charge if he came to the FinCom's meeting? Because if he does, then we just watch it on.
Just one last question, and we don't have to belabor, but
Yeah.
you had mentioned if you remove the trestle, railroad trestle, that would be a contribution to the mitigation. Is the consultant that you're talking to factor that piece of the puzzle in? And would that make the harbor ecologically function better?
That's a great question, Bob.
Something to think about.
Well-
A little homework.
You don't have to answer that.
The quick answer is, so in terms of ecological function, that's hard to say. But what happens with something like that is, again, this model that the Cape Cod Commission has, when you do what's called an inlet, this is an inlet widening, there is a number in there that we would be able to come out with that says you're entitled to this much credit, in your plan if you do that. That's all that it really does for us at this point. So first step is the plan and what they're giving you credit for. The second step is, okay, what did you do and what result did it actually produce? So going forward, that's in situ water quality monitoring. And so if we're not seeing trends in the right direction, we're gonna have to get substantially more aggressive, with what we're doing. So I just want everybody to be on high alert because our water quality is significantly declining, and this is an urgent problem. So regardless of what
Saltwater.
yes, so regardless of what DEP wants to do, I think most people in the town don't want to see our shellfish industry negatively impacted, don't want to see our tourism industry negatively impacted, and if we don't do something very, very quickly, we're going to start to see some really negative impacts. They're bad now. We haven't seen fish kills, and we haven't seen, those kind of things happen, but we're getting close.
And the devil is in the details of what the term very quickly means. And
Yeah.
Well, this is within less than 5 years.
okay.
All
Well,
right.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Sure,
Thank you.
absolutely. Again, thanks for the
Thank you.
dogs.
Don't forget your dog.
Somebody might
She wants
take-
to go with you.
We-
She can come on with me.
never
My
find
cats
the
don't like
cats.
it, too.
She loves cats.
Taking things a little out of order,
If it frees up money.
I'd like to invite the committee to approve the minutes unless someone has an issue.
Second.
All those in
I
favor?
do have a question.
Yeah.
I was going through this the other day, and I noticed like some really minor, just grammatical things, and I just was wondering if anybody cares.
Does anyone care?
No.
No.
Then never mind.
I've got a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Yay. There is no correspondence. Does anyone have a liaison report?
Not tonight.
Not tonight. Strategic planning, I think we already kind of beat that horse a little bit for tonight.
Yeah.
I will say though, and I want to emphasize this to you specifically, Woody, because I am mindful of a comment you made a year and a half ago that we are not a policy setting board.
Okay. Glad you remember.
And if you,
And for you, I don't remember anything I said.
and if it ever feels like we are edging towards trying to be a policy setting board, just smack me upside the head, because that's not the goal here, okay?
I'm nonviolent, but
All right.
Kelly Ryan.
We're
The
just,
virtuals.
we're trying to get the
And I
word
love
out
that
there.
you-
so
Yeah, I
people
agree.
don't just
Group
wake
thing,
up and
Yeah.
say,
I thought that was
Saying
exactly-
right at that 50. No, I
You
totally
said
agree.
Whatever the group thinks.
We've got no transfers. I don't have any other business. Anyone
Can I
else?
just say one quick thing
Yes,
that
of
I
course
didn't
you
say
can.
last week on other business? And it was nice to have Kurt in here and look at that, because my feeling sometimes when I sit on this board is that we look at these numbers, we get exercised over them, and in the long run, because of specific state mandates or policies that have to be met, that we really don't have the opportunity to make a difference on them. So I think it's really important that we do initiate things like strategic planning to give people the idea that things are coming down the pipe, because the school budget is huge, and it is what it is.
Yeah, we can't
So
control it, but
sometimes
we
it
can
gets
control
totally
it.
frustrated to
Yeah.
have the town of Wellfleet, our small town, and every small town, be dictated to by policy, which may not fit our town, and it's
Well,
frustrating, so
I think
it was-
you're right, that's why having Kurt, who was able to come
Thank
in
you,
with
Helen.
specifics that are very, very local.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more, that the school
Yeah.
is a very frustrating thing, unless, I mean, we've actually had members of this committee who very dutifully went to the school committee
Yeah.
meetings.
It's a waste of time.
I'm glad you said that, and I did not,
I
but
wouldn't
I
say
agree
that.
with you
no, but
100%.
it's
like
just,
it.
it is, I'm sorry.
Well,
No, 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 but I'm saying, but Kurt, but
that was
tonight,
refreshing
this
to
was-
say it's not $150 million,
Mhm.
because we are
Right.
actually working to figure out a solution, and
Well, I
I
agree.
love Wellfleet to be a model for
Yes.
I agree.
other small
But it was
towns.
also refreshing for him to bring the news on TV that we have an upcoming water quality problem, which is
Right.
something I have not seen in the newspapers or
Right.
anything else. So that was new to me, so I was delighted to hear that.
And I would also say, if you take even a half a step back from that, applying it to the school, applying it to wastewater, applying it to dredging, the Cape is a fungible environment for a lot of reasons, not just because the sea might be rising, and not just because we have Black Mayo, but because young people come and go, because parents of young children come and go and whatever, and a lot of departments and a lot of budgets are asked to project forward and say, what do you expect in 5 or 10 years, the school being one of them. And it's very, very hard to do that. If you look at the overall, the line of expectations for demographics on the Cape, young people, it's like that. It's not like off the cliff, but it's like, how do you plan for a school in 10, 20 years if you don't think you have students? But then,
There's a lot of kids around being born.
But see, that's,
Maybe not here.
but that's another thing.
Wellfleet.
No, in Wellfleet is actually a success story. Provincetown is not so much.
Uh-huh.
But Wellfleet is a success story in terms that it is a town. I mean, it's pretty vibrant for the winter around here. I'm very surprised and very happy
I'm shocked.
about
And
this.
on that very positive
So,
note,
but what we're doing is,
So
what we are doing is fulfilling
So thanks for
our-
staying.
What we
Yeah,
are doing is fulfilling.
yeah,
It's gonna be
well,
all yours soon.
yeah.
I just want to say that what we are doing here is fulfilling our role as an advisory committee by informing the public of upcoming issues.
Hopefully.
And hopefully they'll listen, but it does get a little frustrating.
Well, because things
We
out of
take it
completely out of
more-
our control change, but
Yeah.
at least the least we can do is try to keep people abreast of things
No,
as they do.
absolutely, no, I agree, I think it's important, but it is sometimes, like I said, some of the issues, but we are not the only small town that are
Yeah.
dealing
Right,
with things
right.
like that, there has to be some sanity somewhere.
So thanks for watching, everybody.
and I would like to entertain a motion to
So moved.
adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.